Hello everyone. Whenever you are building any application, whether you are using Python or Java or any other programming language, you will have to deploy that application. And you could deploy that application to Heroku, Azure websites, and you can also deploy that application to Google Compute or AWS EC2 instances. If you are building an application using Python and you would want to install that application on a EC2 instance and run as your web application, you would need to configure your AWS EC2 instance. Because AWS provides you really very cheap EC2 instance, you can get a one core or very small memory instance with just a few dollars per month. I try to use those instances a lot where I could run my Python application. So if you are also trying to run your Python application into EC2 instance, and with the advances available in Python 3.9, most of the people would want to run Python 3.9 application in a EC2 instance, and you also need to configure your application with Supervisor. So what Supervisor does is that Supervisor can be used to keep running your application without any intervention. And if you set up your Supervisor application as a service, then whenever your machine starts, Supervisor service, it starts by itself, and it also launches your application. So you don't need to manage your application in any way. Just upload your application, configure it properly to run, and that's all you really needed, and Supervisor will take care of rest. So the combination of EC2 instance running Python 3.9 and putting the Supervisor application on that EC2 instance, then config Supervisor to run your Python application. All those things are sometimes very tedious if you don't really know, and you might end up having several problems. So I thought that I could create this tutorial in the form of hands-on lab, which anybody can follow. So this hands-on lab is designed for you to run Python 3.9 any application in AWS EC2 instance where you would want to put Python 3.9 along with Supervisor. And only prerequisite for this application is that you just really need EC2 instance. Everything is available in this tutorial. So please enjoy this tutorial, and if you have any feedback, do share with me. My name is Avkash, and I love sharing technical content through my YouTube channel. So if you like my content, please subscribe it, share it, and make me happy. So let's get started. The full tutorial is also available in the documentation format at this public code repo at my GitHub. Please review this documentation, which provides you step-by-step direction on how you could follow the same tutorial which is available in this hands-on lab. The AWS Linux VM running, and if you look into Python, it has Python 2.7, and if I say Python 3, it actually launches the Python 3.7, and our target is to make sure that we do have Python 3.9 installed in this machine along with Supervisor D and its config for a Python application to auto start whenever this machine boots up. So first we are going to make sure that we install the required packages and library. So we need to say y group install development tools. Okay, after that, once we have got this installed, we need to say sudo yum. Y means just accept my yes whenever it asks for installation. When we need open SSL and develop, we also need to install the bzip2 and its development package 2 and lib ffi develop. So these three packages are required. After that, we have updated it. It's better to do a reboot. And now we are back again after our installed. Then we are going to check that what is our GCC version. We also need to check our make version because we needed these two tools or utils to compile the Python 3.9 code. We also need to make sure if we have wget package installed. If not, then we need to download the wget, and if you would want to use it, you're just going to say sudo yum y install. That's pretty much okay, and then you just need to say you want wget, which say we already have everything. Now we need to get the Python package. So I do have a URL handy. So wget, we are getting the Python, and that is available at my current working folder. tar xvf Python. We got Python unzipped. Let's check into this is the Python code. Then we need to do configure. Enable optimization. So it's gonna config our make depending on the Linux machine. So configuration tool, basically they take the parameter as given and try to configure before you want to make your package. Once configure is done, then we just need to do sudo make and alt install. So Python 3.9.10 is installed here. If we check Python 3.9, it's in path and it's running locally here. If we check for pip 3.9, pip 3.9 is also available, and it also coming out from pip Python 3.9. So it means they both are connected. And if you want to check where the Python 3.9 location is, and it's coming from user local bin Python 3.9. So one thing we need to understand is that if we say Python is still picking for Python 2.7, and if we say Python 3 and is picking for Python 3.7. So our next step will be to remove these Python and Python 3 link to Python 2.7 and Python 3.7 respectively, and make sure that whether you run Python or you run Python 3, both are actually accessing the Python 3.9. And reason we want to do is that because Python 3.9 will be the default Python runtime in this machine, and wherever application needed Python 2.7 requirement, we will manually fix them. Then we can look into which Python and which Python 3. So these are the user bin Python and user bin Python 3 are the links. So first thing we need to remove them. So sudo rm, and we are going to say user bin Python. We removed. We also removed the Python 3. So Python and Python 3 are no longer working. Python is no longer working. Python 3 no longer working. Python 3.9 is still working, and now we need to create the symlink from Python 3.9 to Python and Python 3. So we will do sudo ln as is a symlink, and the path will be same. So this will coming from this path. So user local bin Python 3.9. So user local bin Python 3.9, and it will be user bin Python, and same thing also be Python 3. So if you say Python is referred to Python 3.9, if you say Python 3.9, it's referred to Python 3.9. We still have Python 2 working. So if you say Python 2.7, it's still working Python 2.7, and if you say Python 3.7, still Python 3.7 is also working. So it means we have three Python runtime environment: Python 2.7, Python 3.7, and Python 3.9. However, Python 3.9 is the default one, because whether you run Python or Python 3, both are going to launch Python 3.9.10. And this method is going to break a couple of applications, and then what we are going to do is that we are going to fix those problems one by one. So if we try to check, for example, yum is the application, and you see here that yum stopped working now because it say user bin yum, there is some issue. So we can say what is which yum, and yum is coming from here. So we are going to do sudo vi user bin yum. And this is what you have to do to fix this problem related with wherever your applications are. And here you could see that this is actually referring to Python 2.7. So you can say, please use Python 2.7. Rest, everything is okay here. It's not using anywhere else code. So we will save it. Now you will say yum. Your yum is working. Here is your yum. So the problem related with yum is fixed. We have another command called the Amazon Linux extras. If you try to check, and now you see here that this command is also stopped working because it say no module, because it's try to launch user bin Python, which does not work because Python is a Python 3.9. It's not going to work. So we are going to change that as well. So we can say which Amazon Linux extras, and that's where the user bin location is. So we can say sudo vi, and it's looking into Python. And if you look into very last line here, we have to fix it. I call Python 2.7. So that should fix this issue. So after we have updated the Amazon Extra Linux, let's try to run it. And it's going to hit another error. And this error is here. So we are going to open this file, software catalog py, sudo, and search for BA search. And here's the BA search. Here's the second BA search to fix this problem. So where this none is, we have to change this to x86 underscore 64-bit. So that change x86 underscore 64. Let's close it. After that, we can run again. And now that command is working fine. So we have fixed these two commands. So now yum is working, and Amazon Linux extras, both commands are working. Now our next step will be to install the Supervisor D package first. So to install it, we need to say sudo Amazon Linux extras apel install. There is another error related with URL grabbers. Let's fix this problem now. So this is the URL grabber. So let's sudo vi, and it's using Python, so we can change it to Python 2.7. So after we have fixed the URL grabber ext down, let's run the command again. Looks this thing is working now. Now we can install sudo yum install supervisor. Yes, yes, and supervisor is installed in our machine. We can say which supervisor D, and that's where it is. If we want to know where the supervisor control is, and they both are in user bin supervisor D and user bin supervisor control. This means that supervisor is installed in our machine. If we want to check whether the supervisor is running or not, we can check a couple of ways. One is we can check psef, and you can check say grep Python, it will tell you that whether the supervisor D is up and running or not. Or second way is that you could start the supervisor D if you are launching. So what we need to do is that we need to fix these supervisor D and supervisor control to use the Python 2.7. So very simple is we need to go sudo user bin supervisor D and make sure it's using Python 2.7. Same thing, supervisor control Python 2.7. Now supervisor D is here, user bin supervisor D. And this is just say that permission denied, we cannot write, and that is because we need to run the supervisor D with the sudo elevated permissions. So if you say sudo supervisor D, and as you could see here, the supervisor D is running as a root, and if you would check the PS, now you see that supervisor D has started, and if you would want to check this supervisor control status, and it's going to say that there is some error because we need to do sudo. So now we are back again to our machine and we can check our yum is working, Amazon Linux extras is working, Python everything is back to Python 3.9, and the Python 3 is all working here. And if you look into the ps-ef grep supervisor, nothing is there. Supervisor D is not running because we haven't set supervisor D as a service, but supervisor is running. So next step, what we need is that we need to create a Python application, and it's just a hello world Python application, so we could test that thing and then we connect this application with supervisor D. So I'm in my work folder, so I will create a folder called Python app, cd Python app, and here if you see that we already have Python 3.9 running, so I need to install the packages required for Python Flask app. So pip install Flask, Flask RESTful, Flask compress. So pip 3.9. We can fix this pip to use upgrade pip. And if you say pip version, and it's using 3.9. So all those packages related with Flask, we already have our requirement set it up. We are going to create a app.py. So here one of my sample app where the Python backend, sample Python backend can be created. So this is the app.py code. So I'm going to use this code. So that's the Python Flask RESTful we are using, and it's running on port 8000 because that's where the VM is set to run. So app.py is there. And second thing, we need to create a folder called templates and create the index.html with very simple code like this. So let's create make dir templates, cd templates vi index.html, is this code. So we have very quickly created Python app, and if you say Python app.py, our server is started. If you would want to test this server, and if we add our port 8000, and that's where it is. So the code we have, as you could see here, the request from front end bottom browser is being hit by the Python backend. So that's our Python applications running. Now next step for us is to set up our Python app inside the supervisor. So whenever supervisor runs, our Python app automatically starts. So let's come out here. So we have a application called echo supervisor conf. So this is the application which comes with supervisor installation. So it's available in user bin echo supervisor conf. And whenever you try to run this echo supervisor conf application, it gives you the base supervisor configuration file. So we are in my current working folder, and I could use supervisor conf, and I can store this template code by supervisord.conf. And supervisor application, we have to fix it. Supervisor d, it should be echo supervisor d conf, and make sure that this application is also using 2.7. And now we have supervisor d conf available here. If we try to open the supervisor d conf, this is the basic application configuration for the supervisor d. And if you would want to set up our application, we have to set up our application here, and here is the template. So we can, template is really available here for the program. We can go all the way bottom, and we can set up our application here. So I will set up very quickly. So you say program, you need to say whatever your program is. So we call it Python app. Then command will be, remember we launched through Python, and myapp.py. Process name will be percentage program names. These are all fixed configurations. Directory where it's going to run. So let me close it. So present working folder is this. So this will be our directory, and it's Python app. So our working directory will be this plus Python app. So let me take this path. vi supervisor d, we were here. This is our working directory. Now auto start, auto restart true, redirect, std error, we need to give a path, std logout file. So auto start Python app, we have set this thing up. Save. So our supervisor.d conf file is here. We have added the our configuration related with our application here. So Python app, that's where our log files are. So now what we will do is that we will take this config file and we will move it to a proper place, and that place would be the etc. So we will take this mv supervisor config, we will go to etc, and we just call it, oh, there is already supervisor.d, so we could cancel it. Let's look into vi etc supervisor.d conf. So the configuration file is already available here, so we could actually add our Python app here in this one rather than copying or overwriting. So it's the same application. So let's take this sudo and let's add here. So that's the supervisor config file. It was already there, so we have added our project here. Now we can say sudo supervisor D and -c, we can say use the file from etc supervisor.conf, and this is the worker log. So there is no log files. If you would want to change it, we could actually change that to here, and we just call it home EC2 user, and we just call worker log. So it's very simple. Now let's start. So supervisor D started and it's read our file. If we look into the crude way to check, so ps-ef graph python, and as you could see here, it is started. Supervisor D is using, if you want to check this thing using supervisor control, so sudo supervisor control status, and you see that Python app is started and it say that it could not run correctly. There was some error. So we can look into the Python app location for the logs. So this worker log looks like try to create it, but there is no data because it's a 0-byte file. So std error, we can look into one more time this file. So it's using std log file, std out. We can also say std error log file equals home EC2 user, and we just call it error.log. Let's save it. Supervisor control, reread. So it's Python app definitely change. We can say update. Now we can look into the status. And as you could see here, the error log is created. So error log shows that there was some issues. So we cannot open file Python app my app.py. Python app, oh that's a app.py, not my app.py. So we need to change that. It was set. Update status, back off. Let's look into the log, error log, and no module name Flask. It means that the application what is running right now, so this error it no longer works. It means that Python app was started, but when this application start, it say no module Flask, but that is not the case because Flask does have installed in our machine. It means that the configuration when this application was set, this application configuration is running as a system, it's not running as the EC2 user. So what we could do, we could actually add the user and we just call it EC2 user. So run this application on a EC2 user. Okay, let's save it, reread, update. We can remove this worker log. So there are no logs, everything is clean. Now we can restart Python service. Start. Worker log is created. We can look into, and as you could see, everything works fine here. And now we are going to set up our supervisor D process as a service. So whenever this machine is going to start, it's going to start supervisor D by itself, and because our Python app is configured to start with supervisor D, so our application will start as well. Supervisor process as a service. So when our VM EC2 instance starts, supervisor D starts by itself. So what we need to do is that we need to use this, create the supervisor process. So sudo vim or vi, we need to go to etc init dot d and supervisor d. So this file we will create, and initially this file does not exist. And if we try to take this, cancel it, look into this file, we will say this file does not exist. So we need to create this. So sudo vi, so supervisor.d as a service. And what we need is that we need to take these content and paste this as it is here. Save. So now we have supervisor.d is added over there. So etc init d, and that's where our supervisor.d. So we need to make this executable now. So chmod plus x and same etc init d supervisor, and we need to do sudo. We look into this, became executable now. So we have just created this supervisor.d file. Now we need to make sure this file is added into the check config or the services. So we will say sudo check config add supervisor.d. So that is added. Next we need to turn it on. Sudo check config supervisor.d on. So supervisor.d service is on. Next we need to start. Now sudo reboot, and let's do ps. As you see that we just logged in and the supervisor service is automatically started. It means our configuration is done. Let's review what we have done. We have created a file supervisor.d, added this whole content to in the supervisor.d file. After that we change this file mode to executable mode. Then we have added supervisor.d to check config, then turned supervisor.d on, and then service started. So now machine will reboot, but supervisor.d is up and running. And if you look into our service, Python application is also running without any problem. One more test we will do. We will reboot everything. Sudo reboot, and our application is back on. As you see that initially the no module name Flask was keep coming, and that's only because the service was not able to start properly. The supervisor.d service was not able to start properly, and the best option was for us to put the supervisor service inside the kernel as a service. So when the service is start, it itself runs as a admin mode. However, the application starts with the EC2 user, and that is configured in the Python app configuration into supervisor configuration. So we can look into that. So it was more and etc supervisor.conf, and it's here. So when this application starts, it starts with EC2 user, and for that reason the system automatically starts the Python app. If you would want to control this application execution, we could do using sudo supervisor control status all. Python app is running. If we would want to stop Python app is stopped. So that's all we had in this hands-on lab. I hope you enjoyed the content. I also hope that the questions you had must have resolved with this hands-on lab. And if you still have questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I would be very happy to provide the answers to your questions or comments. Once again, I do appreciate your time, and I'm looking forward to see you in my another tutorial. Until then, thank you. Thanks for your time. Please like it, share it, and subscribe it.